Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, your heart racing, your body heavy with an exhaustion that sleep never seems to cure, only to look at the glowing numbers on a digital screen and realize you are entirely out of sync with the world around you? You close your eyes, but the fatigue remains, a deep, cellular tiredness that feels less like a lack of sleep and more like a profound separation from something vital. This chronic exhaustion, this eternal jet lag of modern existence, is not your fault. It is not a personal failure, nor is it a medical mystery. It is the symptom of a biological theft, a quiet, invisible violence committed against the human rhythm over a century ago. We have been conditioned to believe that time is a rigid, ticking line, a relentless forward march of numbers on a screen or hands on a dial, dictating when we must wake, when we must eat, when we must produce, and when we are finally allowed to rest. But the truth, buried beneath layers of industrial bureaucracy and forgotten history, is far more unsettling. The time you live by is not real. It is an artificial construct, a cage built of imaginary lines and economic mandates. And to understand how we were imprisoned within it, we must first look at the most mundane, universally despised ritual of the modern calendar: daylight saving time. Twice a year, over 1 billion people on this planet participate in a collective, synchronized shock to their biological systems. We blindly turn our clocks forward or backward, pretending that we possess the godlike authority to bend the sun to our schedules. The physical toll is immediate and documented. In the days following this artificial time shift, hospitals record measurable spikes in heart attacks, strokes, and fatal traffic accidents. Human bodies, calibrated by millions of years of evolution to the slow, majestic turn of the Earth, are suddenly thrown into a state of biological panic. And for what? Most people believe this was a necessary agricultural innovation, a logical step in human progress. The reality is bizarre enough to sound like a piece of absurdist fiction. The concept was first seriously proposed in 1895 by George Vernon Hudson, a New Zealand entomologist, a man whose primary motivation was simply to have more evening daylight to hunt for insects after his shift at the post office. From the desire to collect bugs, the idea lay dormant until the machinery of the First World War demanded an endless supply of fuel. Under the guise of saving coal for the wartime industrial complex, empires implemented daylight saving time. They told the world it was a temporary sacrifice for the greater good. But the war ended, and the mandate remained. The state had tasted the power of controlling the very rhythm of human life, and they never gave it back. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. This was not the first time our biology was subordinated to the machine. To find the original theft, we must travel back to the soot-stained skies of the 1840s, before the world was carved into standardized time zones. Before the Industrial Revolution reached its deafening crescendo, time was local. It was intimately, beautifully tied to the exact geography of where you stood on the earth. Bristol had its own time. Norwich had its own time. London lived by the sun directly above London. When it was noon in London, it was 10 minutes to noon in Bristol. This was not a primitive or chaotic system. It was biological perfection. Every community lived in perfect lockstep with the actual physical reality of the solar system. The shadows on the sundials were the truth. The human body, bathed in the specific light of its exact latitude and longitude, knew precisely when to wake and when to sleep. It was a time of belonging, where humanity existed inside of time rather than being endlessly hunted by it. But then came the iron tracks, the black smoke, and the relentless speed of the locomotive. The British railway companies, driven by the absolute necessity of standardized train schedules, found the natural variation of local solar time to be an intolerable inconvenience. A train traveling from London to Bristol could not afford to deal with the reality of the sun. The natural world was interfering with commerce. And so, in 1847, the railway companies did something unprecedented in human history. They declared war on the sun. They forced the adoption of railway time, an artificial standardization that would eventually become Greenwich Mean Time. The local clocks were forcibly synchronized. The unique solar heartbeat of every town was silenced, replaced by the cold, unified ticking of a master clock designed solely to ensure that the trains ran on time. In 1884, at the International Meridian Conference in Washington, this artificial grid was thrown over the entire globe. Humanity was severed from the cosmos, and the movement of the stars was subordinated to the convenience of the locomotive. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Time was no longer a natural phenomenon to be observed. It was an administrative tool to be obeyed. We became biological cogs in an industrial machine, forced to keep pace with engines of iron and coal. But what if I told you that before the railways, before the factories, our ancestors possessed a deeply profound, almost magical understanding of time, an understanding that required technology so advanced, so intricate, that modern historians still struggle to comprehend its existence. We are taught that medieval people were ignorant, living in the dark, measuring their days with crude water clocks and burning candles. But this is a carefully constructed illusion. To shatter this lie, we must walk through the cobbled streets of 1410 and stand before the magnificent Prague astronomical clock, the Prague horloge. As you look up at its towering face, you are not looking at a mere clock meant to tell you when to go to work. You're staring at a monumental cosmological computer, an interface between civilization and the divine architecture of the universe. Its complex dials do not merely track hours. They trace the exact position of the sun and the moon in the sky. They chart the movement of the constellations through the zodiac. They display the Babylonian hours, the old Bohemian hours, the exact phase of the lunar cycle, and the precise moment of the true astronomical sunrise. Its heavy brass gears, turning with a slow, deliberate majesty, were not designed to create urgency. They were designed to create awe. The horloge was not alone. Across Europe, in the heart of cities like Venice, where the Torre dell'Orologio was erected in 1499, and inside the soaring nave of the Strasbourg Cathedral, humanity built these celestial mirrors. The citizens of these eras did not look at these magnificent machines to measure their productivity. They looked at them to remember their place in the universe. A medieval citizen standing in the town square, watching the mechanical rooster crow and the golden sun move across the astrolabe, understood instinctively that they were part of a vast, interconnected cosmic dance. They felt the phases of the moon in their bones, and the clock simply reflected that internal reality back to them. These ancient clocks were forbidden technology in the sense that they fostered a mindset entirely incompatible with the endless, repetitive labor of the industrial age. You cannot convince a man who is actively tracking the slow, majestic progression of the stars to spend 14 hours a day pulling a lever in a dark, windowless factory. And so, this cosmological connection had to be severed. But the rabbit hole goes deeper, stretching back across millennia, revealing a truth so shocking that it threatens to collapse the entirely fabricated narrative of linear human progress. If the medieval astronomical clocks are marvels, then the artifact pulled from the bottom of the Aegean Sea in 1901 is an absolute impossibility. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered among the rusted, encrusted wreckage of a sunken Roman cargo ship, This device dates back to at least 150 years before the birth of Christ. For decades, it sat in a museum, a corroded lump of bronze, ignored by a scientific community too arrogant to look closer. But when X-rays and advanced imaging finally pierced the layers of calcification, what they found defied all explanation. Inside this small wooden box was a network of over 30 precision-cut, interlocking bronze gears. It was an analog computer, a device of such staggering mechanical sophistication that nothing like it would be seen again in the historical record for another 1,000 years. The Antikythera mechanism used differential gearing, a technology the modern world believed it invented during the Industrial Revolution, to track the intricate, wildly erratic movements of the Moon, the Sun, and the visible planets. It could predict solar and lunar eclipses decades in advance. It tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle and the 223-month Saros cycle with a precision that borders on the supernatural. Whoever built this device possessed an understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and mechanical engineering that absolutely shatters the conventional timeline of history. When the researchers finally understood what they were holding, the silence was deafening. The rust-covered gears, spinning silently in the minds of the scientists, whispered a terrifying truth. Human history is not a steady climb from ignorance to enlightenment. It is a story of profound heights and devastating engineered falls. And this advanced astronomical obsession was not isolated to a single Greek genius. It was a global, universal imperative. Journey to the scorched plains of India in the 18th century, and you will find the Jantar-Mantar observatories, an architectural fever dream of monumental proportions. Here, massive geometric structures of stone and marble rise into the sky, not as temples of worship, but as instruments of extreme astronomical precision. The giant sundial, the Samrat Yantra, stands 90 feet tall, its massive shadow creeping across the marble scales, measuring the true local time down to a 2-second interval. It is a machine made of the Earth itself, perfectly aligned with the rotational axis of the planet. Travel across the oceans to the dense jungles of the Yucatan, where the Maya built the pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza, a monument so perfectly synchronized with the cosmos that on the exact day of the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun casts a shadow that creates the illusion of a massive, undulating serpent slithering down the northern staircase. These cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all shared a singular, obsessive focus: to intimately understand and synchronize with the complex rhythms of the heavens. They poured their greatest resources, their highest intellect, and their most sacred architecture into tracking the cosmic cycles. This raises a simple but critical question. Why was all of this discarded? Why was an advanced, universal, multi-millennial tradition of extreme astronomical technology suddenly abandoned and replaced by a sterile, one-dimensional dial that simply counts 12 hours forward from a meaningless midnight? What did they want us to stop looking at? The sky? The sky is a map of cycles, a testament to natural law, a reminder of the infinite. A population that looks to the sky for its rhythm cannot be contained in a cubicle. A population that understands the intricate dance of the cosmos cannot be easily managed. By destroying the astronomical clock and replacing it with the factory clock, they didn't just steal our time, they stole our perspective. They trapped our gaze in the dirt, forcing us to watch the ticking hands of an artificial schedule instead of the majestic rotation of the stars. This manipulation of the mechanical world was seamlessly paired with the manipulation of the conceptual world. The calendar. For centuries, diverse cultures operating entirely independently, the Maya, the ancient Egyptians, the Celtic Druids, all utilized a calendar based on 13 months of 28 days. This is not an arbitrary number. 13 months of 28 days equals 364 days, leaving one singular sacred day to complete the solar year. This system is a perfect, harmonic reflection of nature. It mirrors the exact lunar cycle. It perfectly aligns with the human biological cycle, specifically the female menstrual cycle, weaving human reproduction deeply into the fabric of time itself. Every month began on the same day of the week. Every month was equal. It was a system of absolute, natural logic. But this too was dangerous. It was too organic, too deeply connected to the body and the moon. And so, we were forced into the Gregorian calendar, a chaotic, irregular, bureaucratic nightmare of 30, 31, and 28 days, completely disconnected from any natural or astronomical cycle. Months were named after dead emperors and political figures, their lengths arbitrarily altered to satisfy the egos of conquerors. The word month comes from moon, yet our modern months have absolutely nothing to do with the phases of the moon. We have been forced to live our lives, pay our debts, and measure our lifespans by a system of organized chaos. When your calendar is disconnected from nature, your mind becomes disconnected from reality. You're constantly slightly off balance, constantly adjusting to a chaotic rhythm. And a population that is perpetually off balance is a population that is exceptionally easy to control. But the final, most devastating theft was not mechanical, and it was not conceptual. It was biological. Deep within the human brain, nestled in the hypothalamus, lies a tiny cluster of thousands of cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is your true master clock. It does not respond to the numbers on your phone, and it does not care about the arbitrary time zone imposed by your government. It is calibrated by one thing and one thing only: true, unfiltered sunlight hitting the retinal ganglion cells in your eyes. For millions of years, this internal clock functioned in perfect harmony with the local solar environment. When the sun went down, the temperature dropped, the sky darkened, and our biology gracefully shifted into a state of rest. Before the advent of artificial lighting and the relentless demands of the industrial schedule, human beings did not sleep in one continuous, stressful 8-hour block. They practiced what historians and biologists now call segmented sleep. You would go to bed shortly after dusk, sleeping for 4 to 5 hours. This was the first sleep. Then, around midnight, you would naturally wake up. This waking period, lasting an hour or two, was not a period of insomnia or anxiety. It was a natural, deeply peaceful time. People used this hour to pray, to reflect, to talk quietly by the fire, to read, or to engage in intimacy. It was a pocket of absolute silence and profound peace in the dead of night. After this quiet interlude, you would drift back into the second sleep, finally waking with the soft, gentle light of the true local dawn. This was the biological baseline of human existence. This was the rhythm of a species that belonged to the planet. But the factory cannot wait for your second sleep. The assembly line does not respect your need for a quiet hour of reflection at midnight. And so, this natural rhythm was violently eradicated. We were forced, under the glare of artificial fluorescent lights and the threat of economic ruin, to compress our rest into a single, unnatural block, terrified of waking in the night, constantly anxious about the ticking clock beside the bed. We are biologically designed to be fluid, deeply connected to the subtle shifts in light and temperature, yet we are forced to operate like rigid, unchanging machines. The chronic fatigue you feel deep in your bones, the mental fog that clouds your afternoons, the creeping anxiety that you are always behind schedule. This is not a personal failure. You're not broken. You're simply a biological organism trying to survive inside a mechanical illusion. The jet lag of modern life is the symptom of a species that has been entirely disconnected from its home. A human being synchronized with the moon, the sun, and the natural cycles of the earth was impossible to manage in a factory. So, they broke the connection. They erased the local time. They smashed the 13-month calendar. They hid the differential gears of the ancients, and they replaced the majesty of the cosmos with the sterile beep of a digital alarm. Take a deep breath and let the reality of this wash over you. You're living inside a stolen rhythm, but the truth has not been entirely erased. It is still out there, waiting in the shadows of history. I want you to close your eyes and imagine those ancient, magnificent astronomical clocks hidden away in the dusty alcoves of forgotten cathedrals across the world. Their brass gears may be tarnished, their faces may be obscured by the cobwebs of neglect, but deep inside, their heavy, intricate mechanisms are still slowly, silently turning. They are still reading the stars. They are still tracking the true movement of the universe, standing as silent, magnificent witnesses for a world that was taught and violently forced to never look up again.